Right, so hello. Today I wanted to film a try-chapter tag with 4 books. 2 literary fiction and 2 historical fiction books. I'm currently reading 3 books technically, but most of them I'm not enjoying. I'm only enjoying the non-fiction I'm reading, which is Stamped from the Beginning by Ibram X. Kendi. And this one I know will take me kind of a few weeks to get through, and I'm kind of reading it as if it's a textbook, so I'm also annotating it. So that's great, but I want some fiction that I'm enjoying, and other than that I'm reading Confessions of a Mask by Yukio Mishima. And yeah, this is not a currently reading or a wrap-up, but if it wasn't a gift from a friend, I would DNF it. I'm also reading The Lost Feature of Paper Heart by Natasha Pulley, and it's weird because it's not necessarily that I'm not enjoying it, because when I'm reading it, I'm actually really enjoying it, but I have no desire to pick it up. The second I put it down, I just don't want to pick it back up. So I don't know what it is. Maybe I'm just not a series person. I was satisfied with the way the first book ended, so maybe I just feel like the second book isn't needed. But yeah, I've been reading it since September last year, so what is going on? Yeah, I need a book that I'm enjoying that will just suck me right in. So we have 4 books. There are contenders. I will probably tell you a little bit more about the plot after I read the first chapter, the first 15 pages or so. But we have Detransition Baby by Torrey Peters, and with this one the first chapter is 44 pages long, so I'm going to read 16 pages actually. So I'm not going necessarily... Ooh, there's a lot of sand out there. I'm not going necessarily by chapters, but just the amount of pages that I'm going to read. Yeah, with this one I really would rather tell you about the plot of this book after I've read some of it. Then we have The End of Loneliness by Benedict Towles. This is actually translated from German, I believe, and was published in 2016, and I do think it's going to be rather sad. I think it's about 3 siblings whose parents suddenly die, and then they move to this boarding school or something. I don't think it's going to be sad. It's probably going to be about dealing with grief. And yeah, here I'm going to read 14 pages, because first we have a prologue, and then we have it says Currents, and it says 1980. Is it a historical fiction actually? Okay, so then we have 2 historical fictions. We have The Nickel Boys by Colson Whitehead. I do know it's about a black kid who is sent to a reformatory school, and it's set in the 1960s. I do feel weird talking about books that are set in the second half of the 20th century and calling them historical fiction, even though they are historical fiction, but it's just weird. So we have that. Here I'm going to read 17 pages. So the prologue and the first chapter. And lastly we have Rules of Civility by Amor Towles. I read A Gentleman in Moscow and I really enjoyed it. I was a little bit disappointed with the ending, but the writing style, the humor, just top notch. Really enjoyed it. So I do think this is actually set in the 1930s in New York, I wanna say. And here I'm going to read, actually I don't know. How much would I read? I have a preface, but it's a preface that's already this is already start of the book. So we have a preface that's only 9 pages long, and then the first chapter that's kind of long. Okay, there's a chapter break on page 16. So I'm going to read 16 pages. I'm a slow reader, so I'm not going to read 30 pages because we would be here a whole day. So let me start reading. I'm gonna start with The Nickel Boys. Okay, so I finished the prologue and the first chapter of The Nickel Boys, and I actually remember that last year I tried listening to this book on audiobook, and I've listened only a few minutes, but after listening to it, I've decided that I'm going to buy the physical book, because I found so hard to concentrate on the audiobook. So I was okay, I think the physical book is the way to go. And now I'm not so sure. I think it wasn't the audiobook, it was the writing style. I think the prologue was the hardest, because the prologue kind of throws you right into the story, and you kind of don't know what's going on. So the prologue is set in the present day when some archaeologists discover the bodies at the reform school, and this is inspired by true events. This is set in Florida, and I've read that actually in Florida in the 60s there was a reform school where they discovered bodies of like young kids who went there. And yeah, a reform school is a school for like kids, teenagers who like did some crimes, and they like didn't want to send them to prison, so they send them to reform schools. And the history of reform schools is just horrifying. I know that last year they actually found bodies of like over 1,000, I don't know if kids, but like indigenous people from the residential schools. So it's just it's heartbreaking. I don't know the details, so if they like died from like, I don't know, like abuse, beatings, or like neglect, so like disease, I don't know exactly, but it's still just heart-wrenching. So my problem with the prologue is that after we like read this like horrific scene of like uncovering the bodies, then we go on like what happened after that, like that the news picked up the story, and it's about the kids that used to go there like in the present, like organizing a reunion, and about this man called Elwood that like wouldn't go to these reunions. And I feel like this prologue would have worked better after I knew the story of Elwood, who is the main character of this book. So I feel like the prologue should have been at the end, or we should have just started with the prologue where they uncover the bodies and kind of stop there without kind of the rest of it, because I was just like, what? Who are those people? Like, I don't understand what's going on. So rather than intriguing, it was confusing. But then the first chapter, we kind of go back in time to kind of meet Elwood, and we see his childhood, and that was, yeah, I enjoy this more, definitely. So I definitely will read it, but not sure if it will happen right now. Next, let's go with The End of Loneliness by Benedict Wells. Okay, I finished the prologue and the first chapter of The End of Loneliness, and I really enjoyed it. Coincidentally, this book kind of starts in a similar way to The Nickel Boys, because the prologue is set in the present time when one of the siblings, I think Jules, is in a motorbike accident and he ends up in a hospital. Not quite sure what was the point of this prologue, because we know he made it. Like he was in the coma for 2 days and then he woke up, and that's the end of the prologue. And then we go back through the past, first to 1980. Yeah. And the first chapter is about his family holidays in France, because they were visiting their grandmother who lived there. And I think that chapter kind of portrayed the kind of family dynamics pretty well. So we see both of his parents still alive, because later I'm pretty sure they die suddenly. So the dynamics between their parents and the three siblings. Yeah, I enjoyed it. Next, I think I'm going to read Detransition, baby. Let's get to it. I finished reading the 15 pages of Detransition, baby, and I really enjoyed it. The sun is setting, so it's getting darker and darker. Sorry, I had to feed my cats, and also I'm a slow reader, so it's taking some time. But this was the first time during this like reading experience where I didn't want to stop reading. So a little bit more about the plot, because I didn't tell you anything pretty much. This book kind of focuses on three people. Reese, who is a trans woman, and she's 35 and she really wants to have a child. Ames, who used to be a trans woman but detransitioned, and she used to date Reese. And then the third person is Katrina, who is working with Ames, and they hooked up, and Katrina is pregnant. And Ames called Reese to tell her that he's going to be a father, and he remembers that Reese really wanted to be a mother, and can they talk? That's how far I got. So I'm guessing it's a is going to be about the very complicated relationship between those three people. And I really just like the authorial voice. It's very funny, kind of light-hearted, and I feel like this is what I need right now. But we still have one more book. So now let's read Rules of Civility. Okay, sorry for the change of filming space, but I finished reading Rules of Civility, the first 15-16 pages, and I didn't love it. I have to say, I can tell this is the author's debut novel, which isn't great. Like, the writing, especially in the prologue, was a bit clunky. Yet again, we have a historical fiction that kind of starts with the events from the future. Here it's like the 1960s, and then we go back to the past, so the 1930s in New York. Like, I don't love that. Like, is there no other way of storytelling in historical fiction? First, we start off with the main character and her husband visiting an art gallery, and there's like a bunch of photos there from the past, and she recognizes one of the photographs, like the man on the photograph, and he looks very kind of underweight and disheveled and just doesn't look good. And then she finds another photograph of him where he's looking great and it's like fur coat, and turns out that that photograph was from the, I think, 1937, and the one where he's very underweight and just looking ill is actually a year later. So you're kind of faced with this mystery, like what happened to him throughout this like year, and how does she know this man. Then we go back to the 1930s and we see a little bit of her life there. We are introduced to her roommate Eve, and like even when we're introduced to her, Eve Ross, there's like a page break and there's Eve Ross ... Eve was one of the most surprising beauties of the American Midwest. And then we kind of find out who Eve Ross was, like before she came to New York. And I feel like this like Eve Ross ... to show that the narrator of the story, like the main character, is like reminiscing on the past. Like, that's clunky, that's not good writing. Honestly, we should have started with the second sentence, like Eve Ross was one of the most surprising beauties of the American Midwest. Like, I don't know. Yeah, like I said, it just feels like a debut. So if I were to rank all of the books that I read, I would say this will be at the bottom. So this is number 4. I would say Colson Whitehead would be number 3. Like, the second I started reading the second book, and the second book was The End of Loneliness, I felt like I felt this relief, like, oh my god, it's so easy to read. This book made me feel like I had no brain cells, like I was reading a book in Chinese. Like, just like every single sentence like went over my head. I don't know why that is. I'm definitely going to read it, and the first like official chapter was definitely better than the prologue. But yeah, that would be on number 3 for me. On number 2, I would say The End of Loneliness. I actually really enjoyed it. And yeah, not surprisingly, on number 1 we have Detransition, baby, and this is the book I will go with and read. So this is the ranking. So I hope you enjoyed this video, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!